video I'm going to explain what coronaviruses are and a little bit about this new strain that's causing COVID-19. What I want you to understand is that viruses mutate or adapt, you could even say evolve all the time. So this is not such an unusual situation. I definitely get and understand that we haven't seen this in Australia in my lifetime. None of us are expecting this. It is causing a lot of disruption to the way that we live, work, play, everything. But know that this situation of a virus adapting or mutating and becoming more infectious or jumping from an animal to a human, which is what's happened in the previous coronaviruses, also with the paramyxoviruses that I used to work with, this is not unusual. So what are coronaviruses? Coronaviruses are a family or a type of virus, and then within that family there are a number of subtypes or different strains of viruses. So there are a number of strains that can infect animals, and then with humans, right now there are 7 coronaviruses that have been identified, including the new strain that causes COVID-19 that can infect humans. So the earlier coronaviruses are more likely to cause mild symptoms like the common cold. Generally with coronaviruses, the symptoms are respiratory, but there can also be gastrointestinal symptoms and other symptoms, but generally it's respiratory symptoms, and we think of coronaviruses with respiratory illness. However, in 2002, there was a new coronavirus that had actually jumped from civet cats to humans, and this was a lot more deadly in that it had a higher rate of mortality. And then in 2012 we had MERS, and this comes from camels. It's in the Middle East, and it's less infectious, meaning that it's less likely to be transferred from human to human, but the mortality rate is around 35%. So if you catch that particular coronavirus, the chances of dying are much higher. So I want you to know that coronaviruses themselves are not new. There are different types, different strains, and that they are evolving and, what we say, mutating and adapting, and this can make them more infectious or allows them to jump from a different species. With this new strain, this SARS-CoV-2, it's very similar to the 2002 SARS outbreak that we saw. Actually, a paper was just published to say that it's about 80% genetically identical. And according to this paper, actually, there is a particular coronavirus in bats. I believe, I will post the reference, I think it said that this particular coronavirus in bats is about 96% genetically identical. And actually, it's important to know that bats actually host many different viruses and pathogens, and a lot of viruses actually originate in bats. They'll often then go to sort of an intermediate animal species, and then that might jump to a human. So that was the case with the paramyxoviruses that I was working with. It's also the case with SARS and MERS. So with SARS, we know that the original host was bats. Actually, Limfa Wang, who was my old supervisor, was the one who really identified that. He's been working in this area for over 2 decades. So just know that scientists have been well aware of these viruses for a very, very long time. Here in Australia, we have amazing scientists, great facilities like at CSIRO Animal Health Laboratories, where people are trained to deal with these outbreaks, fantastic diagnostic capabilities, as well as a number of scientists and researchers and doctors all over the world doing fantastic research in this area. So those particular scientists were well aware of these particular coronaviruses, do know quite a bit about them. And actually I read a paper in 2012, it was published in 2012, after the MERS outbreak, that said we really need to be monitoring and working closely with these coronaviruses and keep an eye on them, because it's likely that the next adaptation or mutation may cause some kind of outbreak. It didn't say pandemic, but it was predicted because of what we've seen with SARS and MERS. So what I'm trying to get across to you is that this particular event is not that unusual when you look at the history. We know that viruses mutate. We know that they can become more infectious. But generally in this day and age, with such good technology and diagnostics and healthcare systems here in Australia and around the world, often these things are identified very quickly. If there is concern of some kind of infectious disease, someone will be isolated, and these type of things are contained quite quickly. In this particular case, it wasn't contained, and a lot of people flew out all over the world, and it's been spreading very quickly. And what we do know is the infectious rate, the likelihood to transfer this from human to human is quite high. The mortality rate, it's really hard to say what that is. When we look at countries like Italy, it's around 10%, it's really high. China was 4%. Here in Australia right now, it's less than 1%, though it's early days for us. In Korea, South Korea, they tested hundreds of thousands of people and they had a mortality rate of 1.4%, so much lower than Italy. That mortality rate has a lot to do with the healthcare and the hospital system's ability to care for people that require support, that need to be hospitalised and looked after. So if the hospital cannot cope and people can't be treated, they're more likely to die. So that mortality rate definitely has a lot to do with the healthcare system and hospitals being overwhelmed. So in this case, in Australia, the mortality rate is actually quite low, less than 1%, still higher than the seasonal flu. The seasonal flu mortality rate's about 0.1%. I was looking at calculations yesterday. Things can change. They are changing daily, but at this point it's about 0.4% as of yesterday. So it's quite low, but we still need to be cautious and be aware. But what I'm really hoping to do with this video is just to help you explain that this is not an unusual event in that a virus has mutated and jumped from an animal to a human. I do believe that based on the information from SARS and previous coronaviruses, it's likely that this has come from an animal. I know there are lots of different opinions out there. You're all welcome to your own opinion, but based on the evidence, based on what I know, I think it's highly plausible and highly likely. It started in bats. There is some kind of intermediate animal that was likely at the Wuhan market. Someone has then consumed that animal, become infected, and passed it on. Of course, we're still waiting for more information. We don't know that for sure. But when you look at the facts, the evidence, the science that's been published over the last 10, 20 years, it's highly plausible that that is the case. I guess one more thing I would like to say is that, you know, for those of you who really are panicking and really are stressing out, that's not going to do you any favours. And then for the other people that are posting all these things over the internet about these conspiracy theories, I think some of you may or may not really believe it, but just know that some people are extremely fragile right now and are very much affected by this. Actually, it's the driving factor for why I'm doing these videos, is because I could see the concern, the hysteria, the fighting over toilet paper. Oh my goodness, you know, not just on Facebook or you know, on the internet. Even here where I live, in beautiful Sunshine Coast in Noosa, people were fighting in the car park at Noosa Civic over groceries. We know that a man in America died earlier in the week because he took a substance that he thought was going to protect him from coronavirus. His wife's in ICU. They took the same thing. President Trump got up and mentioned a particular compound which is being used in the front line. However, it's a different form, and at this stage it's not approved and it's not necessarily working. They think it may, but they're not sure. But President Trump came out. I'm not sure exactly what he said, but some people thought that he was saying this was a cure, and then people are trying to find this and taking it, and they've died. So just know there is this kind of panic and hysteria going on right now, and we really want to try to minimize that and give people the facts. So if you have any questions, even if you don't agree with me, I know some of you don't, feel free to post them, and please continue to watch the videos. The next ones are going to be pretty basic, talking about washing hands, questions that I'm being asked all the time about wearing a mask. And again, if you've got any more questions, or topics you would like me to talk about, or depending on what comes in over the next few days or week or so, I'll do some more videos. So thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.